This little black box and the few buttons around it can control my entire smart home from this couch. It's an incredible television controller. Let me show you what I mean. But through the power of Matter, which is something that everyone can use, not only can I control my entire home, but I can create simple, easy automations that are really effective with sensors that are packed into this device. So let me show you what I mean as we go forward with SwitchBot Hub 3, the little box that could. Let's give her. Hello Automators, I'm Brian from Automate Your Life, and you know what? This video isn't just gonna show you what the hub is and what it can do. I'm gonna show you how to do the things so you don't have to waste your time buying something that maybe isn't gonna work in your home. The SwitchBot Hub 3 is actually the fourth type of hub from this company. The difference between this and the previous generations is obvious from the outside. There are a lot of physical controls and a lot of info packed onto a small screen. The screen itself is not super bright, but it's been bright enough for me in every situation that I've tried to put it in. Now the Hub 3 can live on a table like this, or you can mount it on the wall. I'm not worried about any of the buttons ever breaking. There's very few problems that I have with the way the controls work. Everything here feels really high quality. I'm not getting a bunch of thumbprints on the screen, so there are just a few minor problems, like the fact that you'll have a fairly long cable coming out of the back. In fact, you might have a couple of cables coming out of the back here because there's an output on this hub that you can plug a USB-C cable into. I've personally struggled to charge my phone with that though, so I'm not totally clear on what most people will use it for. Now the other problem is in the interface where you have these four little shortcut buttons. They're little tiny dots of light. Those can disappear in bright environments and you just kind of end up knowing where they are as you work with this hub. SwitchBot could have done a little better designing that, but there's a lot packed into this interface that you will not expect. There are a ton of controls on here and a ton of information. You know, up here you can see the CO2 currently green in my home. This lock is unlocked and I can actually control that. So I just locked it and it shows up here and it actually makes a sound. You can configure all of that. This is the outdoor temperature. You can see it's pretty cool around here right now. And this is the indoor temperature, 16.4 and 53% relative humidity. Now we have a home button, a back button, a SwitchBot button, on and off, a full rotary dial, and left-right buttons, as well as, I think it can do up, down. I haven't seen that used. There's a big dial button in the middle, and then these are actually four little buttons. They're hard to see, but they are there, and there's little lights in there that can tell you to do that. Now to move around the interface, in lots of cases, you're actually going to use this. This is your list of devices that you've synchronized between the app and your hub. And then all these kind of become control buttons that do different things based on the device that you're in. So these quick shortcut buttons, these are allowing me to go in here. I can turn on things like the accent lighting over there. You see the blue lights coming on. I can turn those on and off as I see fit. That was all set up using Matter. One of the biggest things that you'll do is you'll control all those different devices, but when you go into each device, they have specialized control options, and you kind of, to get back to that list, you're always hitting this, and then you can get back to the main by hitting that again. That's a quick way of navigating around. Now, how did we decide what's on this screen? There is a couple of shortcuts, so I can hit left and right, and that's actually defined by the app. So when I hit left, you'll see it goes to the LG TV, and when I hit right, it went to my list of Matter devices. That's all defined in here, right here. So I can just choose a device. On the main page, I can choose to put that weather data on there. So that's the outdoor temperature. You have to put in where you live in the world. And to get like the CO2 on here and the 16.4 versus what the hub was seeing, I had to choose this. So this is your environmental data source. Any meter or meter pro, or you see the CO2 version, all of those from SwitchBot can go there. To get the lock on the screen, this is where I choose the lock ultra. You can choose, I think, any of your locks that you've synchronized, and then that status will sit there, and yeah, it's playing those sounds. These 4 shortcuts for devices, this is how you modify what is in each position, A, B, C, D, and this is a scene down here. So this is running multiple actions. So when I hit that one, it's going to turn on multiple things over there. How do you get the devices on here and how do they work? Well, you can go into manage devices and scenes, and then this kind of just shows you what the pages will look like. We can go into manage the devices, and this is where we can add new devices. There's kind of 2 types. Import existing appliances, where you have your SwitchBot devices, and any infrared control, you can import that, put this on the hub as a device, and then it takes a few minutes to synchronize. This other type, third-party control, is if you want to control like an Apple TV or really any of your streaming devices. So those are easy to add. They take just a few seconds. Now you can modify this order. So if you don't want the lock at the top, you can do that. And then here, you'll see it kind of synchronize. So there, my lock ultra's at the top. I hit finish, boop, boop, moved it down in the list. It's now 3rd. I could do the same thing with scenes. So these are where they're executing multiple actions, and I can add those to that. And what that does is that lets me put the devices and scenes that I have synchronized into those shortcut buttons. I can put them on the left and right buttons, so they become usable in a number of ways. Now within each device, you have a number of different controls. So this is my LG TV. I can request the TV to turn on. Well, I could modify what that on button does. I can come in here, I can first of all see all the different controls that I have access to, but then I can go in and I can modify what those buttons do. Especially for things like the D button, you can kind of pick a number of things to include in that list. So if you need a button, that's probably where you put it in. But you can modify this and you can see what all of the buttons do for all of those. Now Matter works a little bit different than the other ones. And you can see when you've made changes on devices, maybe they need a synchronization, they need to be passed here so it does different controls. You can do that kind of thing. So that's how the interface works. Really comprehensive, lots of different things to do. And of course, you have deeper settings that we'll be able to kind of talk to you about as we go today. There's a few great experiences that I've had with the physical control. Number one, that sound coming out of this for my lock, as well as an announcement that comes out of the Vision Pro. But probably my favorite is still the responsiveness and speed of the control on my LG TV. That's all happening through infrared. The dial controlling my volume is fantastic, but there is even more packed into this hub than just the controls. The sensors you can use with the Hub 3 are quite comprehensive. So you can see that you have temperature, humidity, and light level there on that screen. Now, there's actually a 4th sensor right on here, and there's a lot of information. So you can turn on things like absolute humidity versus the relative humidity, the dew point next to your hub, and the vapor pressure deficit. So you can get quite a bit of information. You can see this is being broken down by week, day. You have a lot of opportunity to clear the data, export the data, and even load previous history from other sensors if you have them. Now the humidity and the temperature are sitting in this cable right here. So there's a couple of little holes right there. The other sensor, the light level sensor, is, I believe, on the front of this. And then there's a 4th sensor. It's a motion sensor. Now you do have some settings for that. So I just went into the device settings, and there is a detection sensitivity. So this is driving the sensitivity of the sensor, which is again on the front. It is a motion sensor. It's not a presence sensor. They'll call it occupancy in lots of systems, but you can use that as a motion sensor as you go by. And the motion sensor does adjust the screen if you leave that on the approach to wait. It'll kind of change it to a different screen. So those are the sensors you have right on board this. When you're doing the display, you have some different options for what you display, like that CO2, but yeah, the hub itself has a lot of information available to you. The responsiveness from all of those sensors, it's really good. Even when you're using them with some other platforms, it stays really good. And what I'll tell you is that the best response is gonna be when you use these sensors to automate some of your SwitchBot devices. But it's also just as good when you're using what's called the Matter Bridge feature. We're gonna talk about that method and what that gives you in a bit. But before we do that, let me explain the 4 main categories of products that you'll be able to control with this. It does end up being pretty much everything in your home. But first is what SwitchBot sells themselves. So when we talk about the Bluetooth devices that SwitchBot sells, and actually any device, it can connect to this hub, it can be used on this hub, but the locks and a few other devices have some special features, so I want to show you that. This is my Lock Ultra, this is my Lock Pro, and this is my original SwitchBot lock. So I have all 3 of them. You can do this with any of them. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna pair the lock to the hub. So this is how it works with the lock. You don't have to pair everything to this hub, but the lock is kind of special. You can see connected to the hub, the lock, it's saving pairing information, and now we have the device control screen. So if I want to change things, you know, no command is paired with this button, but maybe I want to do something like unlock. Okay, great. Now I have it on the screen. Obviously I can manage where it is in my overall list of devices, so I can roll up to it, and now we have control of it. But I've shown you before, we probably want to put that lock in a few other scenarios. We want more control, more information. Well, let's start with the lock status. Because I've paired that lock, I can put that status right there. So that's how you do that. And I can add it as a shortcut to shortcut B here. I can select the device, there we go, and now it's on screen. So it's that quick to use and control these devices. And you know, the locks have a little extra, so that you could just hear my lock going off. And yeah, now when I'm opening and closing that lock and it's reported back to this, you get a little sound. There it goes. I had to get out of that screen. I was doing a lot with the hub, but there it goes. That's the sound. And yeah, now when I go to lock it, you hear it lock. And there you get a nice little sound. So the lock has some extra features. Not everything has all of those features, but that's how you deal with a lot of SwitchBot devices. That's the simple way to control SwitchBot gear. Every SwitchBot product has really great integration with this hub. Generally, I find that what they have set up is what you're gonna want anyways, but there is some customization. Now, most SwitchBot products are Bluetooth connected to this hub. Versus their older hubs, I'm not finding a big difference in the distance of connection possible. Honestly, if there's a couple of walls or doors in the way of these two communicating, I'm probably getting 30 to 50 feet depending on the device and the situation. In open air, it does go much further, so it all depends how your home is set up, and that's where you might still end up needing a couple of hubs to control all of the SwitchBot gear in your home. But I will say this one does seem to cover a little more distance than the previous Hub 2 or the Hub Mini. Now there's a second type of device that you can control through Bluetooth. Those are streaming sticks or streaming boxes, and you saw that briefly earlier in the video, but this is a useful way to control those kinds of things. You don't necessarily have every control you might want, and you know, the best example of that is if you're looking for a voice assistant button, keep on looking. The third type of device is something that SwitchBot has done very well for a long time now, but they've really improved the situation on Hub 3. Here you can see me controlling a fan made by a company called Drio. Now that fan is all the way across my main floor. It's over 35 feet. Now what is happening here is that the SwitchBot Hub is sending out an infrared signal. Today they have over 100,000 infrared codes available for this hub. So they've been building that library, and they have 3 different programming methods available. So if one doesn't work, another likely will. They've also made this hub capable of sending out those infrared signals even when the internet is out. So you're always going to have physical control of your gear. I'm going to show you the 3 different methods for setting up infrared devices and getting your hub to send those commands out. When you're inside of your hub, you can see the little section for IR appliances. So you hit plus, and when you come in here, you know, if you've already had a SwitchBot hub, you can duplicate from another one of those hubs. So if you've already kind of programmed in a remote, you can do it that way. And that way you don't have to reprogram your remote again. But let's say we wanted to get our television in. Well, you can see the different categories that they have in here. And the easiest method is just smart matching. And what you do is you basically get your remote ready, you hit start matching, and they'll ask you usually to do like the power button. So I just did the power button towards my hub, it read it, and now it found 2 templates for the device. So now I can go got it, and then you can test to see if it works with your television, okay? So you go press it, you can see it sending out. There's a little light that goes on right there, if you can see that. Okay, this one's not working, so I go not working. We have a second template. Let's see if that works. Now, sometimes that'll work, sometimes it won't. If it doesn't work, well, then we go back and we go to select manually. And I find this actually to be one of the most useful ways. And the reason I say that is because, you know, this remote is partially infrared and partially Bluetooth. And so some of the commands go out over Bluetooth, but the TV knows how to handle all the commands from an infrared standpoint. So I can actually just search. I can go into LG. This is a C4, and there's my model of TV right there. So I can just hit that, and now I can test it out. So I can blast it out. Okay, it's working instantly. I can test a number of things. So here I'm going to do the volume. Yep, that's working. And I can even move the menu around. I just pressed OK, and you can see it went in. Now, those first 2 methods, they're really simple. They're going to work with all the different codes that SwitchBot has pre-programmed into their system. Okay, it's super quick, super simple. But the third method is something that can give you complete control of your products. It works really well with that Matter feature we're going to talk about in a bit, but what this method does is it lets you customize everything entirely. Now, the third method is allowing me to do this. So there, right over there, my light just toggled on and off, and it's its own device in HomeAssistant, okay? And this is using the Matter Bridge feature, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But because of the way I've configured this remote in the system, I can have control. I'm going to create a new IR device, and you know, there might be some restrictions on the type of device, but this has worked for me with TVs and others and a few other things. But I just pick other in general, okay? And we're gonna do a button that allows us to basically control that light again, okay? So fan, light, okay, and I'm gonna hit save. And now we've got to learn some buttons. So I'm gonna hit edit, and you tap the plus. And this button controls that light. So I'm gonna teach it that. I'm gonna hit that, make sure it works, working great. I'm gonna hit save button, and I'm gonna call this on. Now I'm gonna hit plus again, and you kind of got to do 2, okay? And I'm hitting the same button, so it's learning the same button again. Test it. Okay, it's working. Save, and we'll just call this off. With this method, you can teach it all the individual buttons, and this works really well for televisions. If you're having trouble with certain buttons on that, you can teach it all the different buttons. But this little fan lighting, this is going to help us in just a few moments. Now that I have that light control set up on my fan as a power button, I can use that with the final method of controlling our whole home from our couch. This fourth method is using what's called the Matter Bridge feature. You'll see the Matter logo all over products and web pages nowadays, and you know, the Matter Bridge feature is a component of that. What it lets you do is bring everything from the SwitchBot app into other apps like Apple HomeKit, HomeAssistant, Homey, Amazon, Google, SmartThings, and you can then control all the stuff from SwitchBot in those apps. And with voice assistants, for example, you can also do automations in those apps, but all of that is happening locally too, so there's no requirement for the internet to be available to control your SwitchBot products in this way. With the Hub 3, there's been 2 key improvements to this feature. Past hubs from SwitchBot had a maximum of 8 devices that you could bring from the SwitchBot app into those other apps. This meant you definitely end up with a few hubs. Now, on Hub 3, we have a maximum of 30 devices. The second problem was a delay that would happen when I controlled things from, Apple HomeKit or another Matter Ready app. I have plenty of videos that I took in my home where it took 3 to 4 or sometimes even longer for that command to make the SwitchBot product move. It wasn't always like that, but with the Hub 3, I'm having 1 to 2 seconds at a maximum. And sometimes it's a lot faster. So here I have the Lock Ultra in HomeAssistant. There you go. And here's the Lock Ultra being controlled in Apple HomeKit. Very fast on that one. And here's the Lock Ultra in Homey. But as we go through the setup of this feature, you're going to see how we can add all the sensors from this hub, as well as a number of buttons. And that's how I was doing all this control in my home with the lights and my shades. You'll also see how we can use that third method of infrared device to get more control in those other Matter Ready apps. So this is truly where we can end up controlling our whole smart home from our couch. Setting up Matter is pretty easy, but there are some good choices and some not good choices. So I've gone into the settings for my hub, and you can go into Matter Setup. Now they're going to run you through pretty much all of what you need to do. So we're going to connect the device. The device's Matter settings will be cleared. You may or may not get that depending on kind of what you've done with the hub before. I've set up Matter before, but I wanted to do this demo. Now I have a Matter code to copy. Now, if you continue to follow this page, then what will happen is you'll go into Google Home, and I'll tell you, that's not always a great choice for connectivity, for everything working really well. So, what I would recommend is Apple HomeKit if you have it. I've had good success with Homey as kind of a first platform, and HomeAssistant. Now, I've shown this with many platforms before, but I'm going to show it with HomeAssistant today. So no, it's new, it's brand new, and we're going to set it up without the QR code because we're not scanning that QR code this time. We could have potentially done that, but I'm ready. Now it's connecting to the device. We have things very close. It's generating Matter credentials. All of this is happening through Bluetooth on my phone. And now we're connecting the device to HomeAssistant using our home network. So now it's basically been connected using Wi-Fi to HomeAssistant. Everything's connected. Now I hit done, and I have my Hub 3 set up. We can also see that it instantly connected 3 devices. So with the Hub comes the humidity sensor, the motion sensor, and the temperature sensor. But now is where we can pass this out further to other platforms. So if you want to do that, you just hit share device. Okay, hit share again, and now it's communicating with the device, and now we have another code to copy. So I can copy that code, and now I can head to my second platform. So let's say that's Homey. I'm going to hit new device, choose Matter, connect via Homey Pro, continue, and we're just going to paste in that code. And now we're going to communicate between our phone, the Hub. So you generally want this a little close to the Hub for this initial pairing process, but now it's being added. We could continue the setup, but I'm just going to hit skip because we know what it's adding. Now that we have the basic setup done, now we can start adding devices to other platforms. So the secondary devices tab is where you want to head into. We're still in Matter setup, and now I can go through, and these are all the devices I had previously added, okay? But you can add more devices down here just by hitting the little plus, then it'll bring it up. So I'm going to add my Meter Pro. So that just added all the different sensors from the Meter Pro. So not only do I have the temperature, the humidity, the CO2, that's all going now to all those Matter apps. I also have my shades, my lock, different types of locks, my temperature, humidity, the motion sensor on this Hub, and you can see all these different buttons. Now you don't really have to hit that setup button, but I'll show you what it does in just a second. I've also included the Drio, that fan, the toggle for the fan, and the light toggle. Now what you have to do when you set these up is you have to set up what are the on and off buttons for those kinds of devices. For TVs, you just have to set the power. So that's already kind of set in my LG TV, but that's what you're doing. So we made that fan lighting one. You have to hit setup, and then you have to choose your on, and then you have to choose your off, and then you can add that into your Matter bridge. So that then gives you those controls in those other apps. Now I can add additional buttons if I want. I can just keep hitting plus on that, and that's why I have so many. I've added up to 22 before. So those buttons all go into this, and that's why I have shortcut 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So you can see 15 buttons, 15 shortcuts. And I'll show you where you change those names right now. So back here, we go into devices and scenes. We go into manage devices, and there is the Matter device. So if you haven't already, you will have to hit plus and add your Matter device from in here, okay? It will be sitting there, and when you add it, then you can come in and you can configure the names that you want associated with each of the buttons on your Hub. So once you're done configuring both of those things, you're basically ready to go with Matter from a button standpoint and all those devices. So after bringing in all that stuff into Apple HomeKit and a few other apps, you can see all the different controls that I have. So not only can I control my locks from Apple HomeKit, I can control things like my shades. So now those are closing right now. And I have all these buttons, and I can set up single press automations. So let's say I wanted that to control my Sonos speaker as well as do some other things. I could add all those different things. And now when I press that button on the Hub, it'll play that speaker. I also have control of my infrared remotes. Now I know it says IR remote DIY. That's just how it comes in. You have to rename it, but there you go. That sent out the light toggle. So now that we have, all these buttons, the infrared remote for my television, all of these things, we can create automations based off of those. We can use them as triggers, we can use them as actions. TV generally, we're gonna turn that off or toggle that. For the buttons, when you go into the buttons, you can see when they were last pressed, and you can create automations off of those. So here's one in HomeAssistant. When this button changes state, then we're gonna do something. So I have a little checker where I'm checking the position of my shades, and then I'm opening them if it makes sense. So these kinds of things you can build with those different buttons. With things like the motion sensor, for example, I can see that it's detected in front. You see it went clear and the hub turned off its little lights. So that was a really fast response. Now watch. There you go, detected. So the response is really fast on things like that. I think the most powerful feature there is that we can add up to 30 buttons. Now, I say that because you don't just have to use one of the Matter Ready apps to run an automation when you hit that button. So hitting that button can run automations in other apps. I can start an automation in Apple HomeKit as well as Home Assistant and Samsung SmartThings and Homey, like all of them at the same time. Now, there is one problem with Amazon and Google right now not being able to handle those buttons, but that's a problem in those apps. It should eventually be resolved, but it's Google and it's Amazon, so who knows? But if you have your smart home split out over multiple apps, this really helps bring them together. This has let me create a number of automations that I think are very useful. So let me give you some examples. Now I have a SwitchBot humidifier and I don't want it running when the humidity is too high, right? So this little set of automations turns on and off the humidifier as needed. What's nice about this is that I'm using the humidity sensor on SwitchBot's hub. So, if that's closer to a person, it's gonna be more accurate to where I want the humidity to be instead of the onboard one on the humidifier. But you'll notice here that there's this condition. It's checking that I'm actually at home before it turns on the humidifier. And we also have this other automation that turns off the humidifier when I'm not at home any longer. So that it's just running on its own at the right time. Because the SwitchBot Hub 3 has a motion sensor, and because we have all of these infrared devices that we can control, we can actually save a lot of energy. So if no one has been around the Hub 3 for a very long time, we can turn those off. Now this is really nice to do in some of those other Matter apps because you'll likely have access to a lot more devices, and you can do conditions like checking if the TV is on before you send that signal for power. And finally, I think a lot of you might be wondering how I'm controlling my shades in order to get them to move up and down with a single Matter button. Now here's the automation that is sending them open. We're checking the position of the Lutron shades. Then it sends the shades open if that's satisfied. And here's the second automation that is sending them closed, which you can see is just the reverse. Now I'll tell you, that automation isn't perfect if you're pressing the button a lot of times in a row, but what it does, it reverses them every time you press the button. So it really works well for me as a controller for my shades. There's a lot of value in this device. It'd be $20 or $30 for a temperature and a humidity sensor. It'd be another $20 or $30 for a motion sensor, and a light sensor might cost you even more. And then you couple all of that with the infrared control, the automations you can run, and that Matter Bridge feature that's bringing everything from the SwitchBot app and their unique products into those other apps locally. There's a couple of limitations in the automation system. What I would like to see, SwitchBot folks, if you're listening, I would like to see the buttons that I've been able to create here. If I start an automation inside of the SwitchBots app, I want to be able to use that button as an action. That would then let me send an automation over to other apps automatically from one of your products. The other limitation, I can't bring Matter devices into SwitchBot's app. My sense is that SwitchBot will eventually let us do that, but I can't guarantee you anything there, and they've never said anything like that to me, okay? So don't buy this hub with the hope that those things will be resolved, but I'll definitely be giving that information to SwitchBot as something I'd like to see here. But that's it. And those are very advanced things, and truthfully, you can get around those problems if you just play a little. I think SwitchBot has produced a hub that is finally where it needs to be for you real automators to be able to dig in deep and create great automations in your life. So if you've been using SwitchBot hubs in the past, replace them with one of these. You'll get much more out of your smart home. But even for beginners, if you're new to all of this, this is a gateway to all of their very unique products. And it's a gateway to having a physical controller at your fingertips for platforms like Apple HomeKit and more. So to me, this one's an instant buy. It's a significant upgrade. It is more expensive than their previous hubs, but it's definitely worth that experience jump. Now, of course, all the links are below. SwitchBot always gives us great deals and good coupon codes, so those are down below in the description. Now, I know today's video wasn't a full guide of like everything you might ever want to look at with this hub, okay? It gave you the big ticket items, but if you're looking for more help on how to use SwitchBot products, well, the guide that we produced for the Hub 2 is actually really applicable. The only difference is really the performance here, okay? And some of those physical controls. So you can watch that guide right there. The other thing that'll really help you if you're working with infrared products a lot is our guide to the SwitchBot Universal Remote. They all kind of work the same way. Otherwise, thanks for watching today. And of course, live smart.